Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Korean barbecued rack of lamb. That's right, before cows and pigs got involved, America's earliest forms of barbecue featured lamb. And back then, barbecue simply meant wrapping meat in leaves and then cooking it in or near a fire, which is pretty much exactly what we're going to do here. Except instead of using leaves, we're going to use a very simple, incredibly delicious Korean-inspired marinade. So with apologies to those that were hoping for leaves, let's go ahead and get started. And we'll do that by adding a couple tablespoons of Korean chili paste to this bowl. And if you want to use the proper name, this stuff's called gochujang. And what this is a fermented rice and chili paste. And it is, for lack of a better term, a flavor bomb. And by the way, in the blog post, I'll tell you where to find some. And then to that, we will add a whole bunch of finely minced garlic, as well as some finely sliced green onions. And mostly we're using the white and lighter green parts. And then we'll also want to toss in a spoon of brown sugar. Actually, let's make it a spoon and a half. We're also going to want to pour in some rice vinegar, as well as a little drizzle of sesame oil. And if it seems like I'm not measuring these things very carefully, that's because I'm not, at all. But anyway, continuing on, of course we're going to need to add some salt, which we're going to do with both regular soy sauce, and no low sodium, please. We're going to need all that sodium, as well as a spoon of good old-fashioned kosher salt. And once we have all that in there, we'll take a whisk and give it a mix. And as soon as everything's been thoroughly combined, our marinade, which by the way is also a brine and a sauce, is done. And what we'll do is simply set that aside while we move on to prep our racks of lamb, which should be pretty easy since these things are generally sold already trimmed, and the ones I bought were. And by the way, these go just about a pound each, and one rack will generally feed 2 hungry people. And it's pretty key that we're using racks that have been Frenched, which means the meat and fat around and between the bones has been trimmed out. And if it hasn't been, no big deal. You can just stick your knife in between the 2 bones and trim that away. And then besides making sure the bones are cleaned off, there's also about an inch thick cap of fat that come on these, which will usually have been removed if you buy these trimmed, which again is how these were purchased. But if you do want to trim a little more off where the bone meets the loin, feel free. And then the last little bit of knife work we want to do here before this hits the marinade is take our knife and cut in between each bone. Almost, but not quite until it hits the loin. Alright, so we're just cutting in between those rib bones and not touching that tubular piece of meat below. And not only will this let our marinade penetrate a little better, but once these racks are on the grill, it's also going to make them cook a little more evenly as well. So I went ahead and did that to both racks. Or as you Game of Thrones fans might refer to it, dos raques. But anyway, once our racks are trimmed, we'll go ahead and transfer those into a zip-top bag. And then we can carefully and confidently transfer in our marinade. But before we seal this up, we want to make sure we give it a very, very, very thorough massaging. All right, I'm going to edit this down to just a few seconds, but you're going to want to take a couple minutes and make sure you work all that marinade in and around the meat, into every single nook and cranny. Oh yeah, don't forget the crannies. And by the way, I've never done this where one of the sharp pieces of bone doesn't penetrate the bag, and some of the marinade will leak out, which is why I highly suggest placing this in a bowl. And what we'll do once those are thoroughly coated and this is sealed up is go ahead and transfer that into the fridge anywhere between 8 and 24 hours. And it's usually not a bad idea to give that bag a flip once or twice while it's in the fridge. But anyway, we'll go ahead and let that lamb marinate overnight, at which point we'll pull it out and transfer it onto this plate. And of course you're going to save any of the extra marinade. Just stick whatever's left in the bag in the fridge, and I'll show you what to do with that later. And then all we're going to do to prep these for the grill is blot off a little of that extra moisture from the surface with a paper towel. And by the way, we're just doing this to the fattier side. Speaking of which, once we have that dried off a little bit, I'm also going to apply a little extra kosher salt to this side, and suggest you probably do the same. And then once our racks have been seasoned, we'll head outside, where hopefully we're going to cook these over some nice smoky coals, so that we can legitimately call this barbecue. And what we'll do is want to start these with the fat side down for about 7 or 8 minutes before flipping them over. And I should mention, we don't really want to do these over super high heat. Okay, I adjusted my vents so I was maintaining a heat of about 350. And at that temperature, these are going to take roughly between 20 and 25 minutes depending on the size. And of course, how well done you want them. All right, I'm shooting for about 125 internal temp, which is going to get me just to about medium rare. And like I said earlier, I like to give the fat side about 7 or 8 minutes before flipping these over. And we'll go ahead and cook them the rest of the way just like that, which is probably going to take another 12 to 15 minutes. But again, it depends on many variables, which is why you're going to use a thermometer to check your work. And if one of your racks is a little bit smaller, like this one here, it's probably going to finish a little bit earlier. So I pulled that one off first and gave the other one a couple minutes. And I should mention, fair warning, the smell is incredible. So if you don't invite your neighbors, there could be problems. Although if you do invite your neighbors, there could also be problems. I guess it depends on your neighbors. And then what we'll do once we've decided our meat's cooked long enough is head inside and let it rest for about 10 minutes. And what we can do while we're waiting is go ahead and transfer any of the excess marinade into a pan and bring it up to a boil so that it's safe to use as a sauce when we serve our meat. And above and beyond bringing it up to a boil for safety reasons, we of course also may want to reduce it a little to thicken it up, which is exactly what I did. At which point we can pull it off and go ahead and brush it onto our racks, which as you can see we're presenting Flintstone style, with our 2 sets of bones interwoven and crisscrossed, which I think makes for a very exciting visual, especially once glazed. Okay, so this step is optional, and you don't have to do it if you don't want. I mean, you are after all the John Hamm of your rack of lamb, but personally I think it looks amazing, and you'd have to be a madman not to do it. I mean, come on, look at that. That's almost not fair. I mean, I could seriously look at that all day, but I'd rather cut into it and try some. And to carve this, we simply cut between the bones, normally allowing 2 ribs per piece, since there's usually 8 bones, but this one had an extra one. And not only did our marinade serve as a marinade and as a glaze/sauce, but because of its sugar and salt content, it also acted sort of as a brine. And it really helps that meat retain a lot of moisture, as hopefully you can see here. And sure, it helps we didn't overcook it, but this could not have come out any juicier. And by the way, if you overcook yours just a hair and it's not quite as pink as you want, don't worry, just paint some of the sauce on and no one will ever know. Because with this marinade, even a little bit overcooked is still going to be very juicy, very succulent, and extremely flavorful. And I would have been more than happy to eat the rest of that rack just like that. But I thought I would be a professional and plate some up for the final shot with a little bit of our famous prop coleslaw. And while our Korean-style marinade did amazing things texture-wise, the flavor and savoriness of this is just as impressive. So to summarize, there is nothing I don't like about this marinade. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling Korean barbecued rack of lamb, while certainly not as popular as pork and beef, when you consider its richer, slightly gamier flavor, lamb may very well be the ultimate meat for barbecuing. But of course, having said that, if you're not into lamb, this really would be wonderful on pretty much anything else, including, and you didn't hear this from me, grilled tofu. But regardless of whether you use some rack of lamb, or another cut of meat, or curd of bean, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.